That's right, folks. Coming up on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, we're going to discuss the top 5 matchups for Week 1 using our slot versus wide analysis. We're super excited to be rolling out the brand new 2023 slot versus wide points per game allowed for wide receivers in 2023. And if you're new to Razzball and you don't know what I'm talking about, the best news is I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. On Razzball, we've gone a step further, folks, and we have broken out fantasy points allowed to wide receivers via the slot and out wide. So last year, we showed you the data for 2022. On today's show, we're going to break down the top 5 slot matchups, basically players that line up in the slot and also out wide. And just because we love you so much, we also have the data broken out by where the receivers line up. So when you go to razzball.com, you check out this tool, and you might say to yourself, well, who gets the most fantasy points in the slot for the New Orleans Saints against the Titans? Oh, there's a whole other section for that as well. So make sure you jump over to razzball.com and check out all these great tools. But let's start the show. Top 5 matchups, slot versus wide, starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And bringing on my Friday friend. And honestly, at this point, Ben, I'm just going to have to call you my full-time friend because you've been on here every Friday. Every weekend, I start off with Ben Wasley. Go follow him at Fantasy First Down Noah on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
What is happening? I'm really happy to talk about some matchups with you this season. I'm a big matchup guy. I do a lot of my rankings based on matchups. I know you do as well. So I'm really excited to talk about the slot versus wide, which is not something I really used before. So I'm hoping it can take me to the next level in the rankings as well. Go for that number 1 spot.
Love it. Love it. And that's why, Ben, I'm glad you're here, man. We're going to talk through it today. So last year we started this process where we have actually dived in, and I asked myself, like, everywhere I go, I find points per game allowed data, for wide receivers. And I asked myself, I'm like, well, has anybody ever broken out by slot and wide? And now I answer that question. I say, this guy did. All right, I did it. We do it all in the back end through Razzball. I think it's a very useful tool to understand where a defense is allowing the fantasy points. And so this is what we're going to be doing all off season long. We're going to be off season. We're doing the season just started, folks. I'm sorry. I totally forgot. But yes, we're going to be doing this every single week, every Friday, our slot first wide matchup show. And at the end, Ben's going to drop his streamers of the week as well, based on his article that dropped on Razzball a few days ago, and will be coming out every single week. Before, Ben, I didn't set you up for this. We had our first action, on last night. Chiefs-Lions. Lions with the upset. First thoughts about that Chiefs-Lions game. Fantasy takeaway, NFL takeaway, anything you want.
It's a bit underwhelming, wasn't it? I mean, we always knew the Chiefs were going to be a little bit of a question mark. I was pretty sure it was going to be Sky Moore, MVS, and maybe Justin Watson getting most of the snaps. I did not expect like a 7-man committee at wide receiver. That was a bit weird. I think Sky Moore kind of got the amount of action we expected. He just didn't get the targets we expected. He was on the field, but the targets didn't go. I think we also knew that Amon-Ra St. Brown was going to be very good. David Montgomery, a little bit hot. Did not expect that either. So we'll see how that changes over the season as well. I think we'll see Gibbs get a lot more action in the coming weeks.
So many takeaways from that game. Obviously, Gibbs they wanted to show him. This is what Dan Campbell said. We wanted to show him what game action looked like, so we're going to ease him into the season. Sure, Dan. Whatever you say, dude.
That's what the preseason is for, Dan.
I know. I got to tell you, there was no Chris Jones last night. I think David Montgomery is like the greatest sell high ever. If you could sell him right now, because he did get a bunch of carries, but he had like 75 yards rushing and a touchdown. And so, obviously I think if Gibbs does get ramped up at some point, I think you could probably I don't think anybody's going to buy David Montgomery off this game, but if you're a David Montgomery truther and a guy loved him in the draft process, you could probably get him for a little bit more than you usually would after this game. Sky Moore was brutal to watch, dude. Like, Mahomes breaks through. He throws it just high, tips off his fingers. Then he has another one called back to a reception. Then he has another one poked out of his hands. Then there was another play which he was like wide open, and then like the ball deflected or something. And it's just like painful to watch because I had his 3.5 reception prop over. And I also had Amon-Ra St. Brown 6.5, and he decides not to catch a pass after 6 when he had 6 like in the first few minutes of the third quarter. So that was brutal. I know.
Speaking
That
of
was tough.
Sam Laporta, the first rookie tight end since 2019 to get 6 receptions in week 1 as well. Told you about Laporta. We knew it was coming.
You did, man. That was good. Honestly, toot your horn right now. I'll give you full credit. I am not going to buy it full in just yet, but I appreciate I got to call it out when I was wrong. I'll concede for that. All right, let's get it. Yeah, that's all right. It's all right. So let's get into it. Let's talk about these out wide matchups. That's what we're going to talk about today. First topic. And basically what we're talking about is which defense is on the perimeter, basically outside wide receivers. When you think outside receivers like Mike Evans, for example, those type of receivers that line up mostly out wide, these were the best matchups for those receivers last year. On today's show, we're going to cover the top 5, but also talk about what changed, and then we're going to discuss how that's going to impact week 1. All right, first off, Tennessee Titans. Number 1, most fantasy points allowed last year out wide. Basically, there was no changes. Still Mike Vrabel there. There's no DC change or anything notable there. They did have some changes on the perimeter. They had Sean Murphy-Bunting, who is an upgrade for them. He did get hurt last year with the Bucs, but came back halfway through the season. Former Bucs head coach has talked him up and said he was a big loss for them. So that's good for the Titans. They also get Christian Fulton back. He was in and out of the lineup last year. So there could be some better personnel out wide. They get Saints in week 1. So what's your thoughts, Ben? Are you all in on Olave, Michael Thomas? What's your thoughts about those matchups?
I mean, you're starting Chris Olave. We know you're starting Chris Olave. They have made a couple of changes, not the changes I was hoping for. I think we kept expecting that they draft a defensive player somewhere in the draft, and they just didn't draft any at all. Murphy-Bunting's fine. I think they were really hoping that Farley would come back, but he's still injured. So they've ended up with the same guys. I think this is still going to be a good matchup. Even Michael Thomas, who most weeks is going to be a risky start, I think this week's is the kind of guy you can put in your flex and you can feel okay about him.
Yep, I agree 100% there. Let's jump down to the Minnesota Vikings. Last year, they were ranked 2nd with the most fantasy points allowed out wide. Talk about change, by the way. This team has not only got a new DC and Brian Flores, but they have 3 new starting cornerbacks, okay? They signed Brian Murphy, the slot cornerback from the Arizona Cardinals to man the middle, but then they also have 2 very young perimeter cornerbacks. They get the Tampa Bay Bucks in week 1, folks. So Baker Mayfield, you excited or what? You're going to be out there lighting it up? Mike Evans could be a solid wide receiver 3 this week. Chris Godwin as well. What's your thoughts about the matchup for the Bucks and your overall thoughts about the changes to the Vikings secondary?
I mean, you never really know what to expect with rookies, and they've obviously got a rookie in Blackman out there, but they've made a heap of changes everywhere. Byron Murphy I like, though he does occasionally allow some big plays, but I like Byron Murphy. So Chris Godwin becomes a slightly tougher play. He's going to be more in the slot than anyone else. Mike Evans, though, is a stronger start than he would be most weeks. And hey, if you're really desperate, maybe Trey Palmer. We expect him to probably be the other outside receiver. So it's entirely possible that he'll get a little bit more action than he would most weeks. I don't know that I'd want him outside anything but DFS, though.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably a DFS dart throw there. Don't get crazy and put him in your redrafts. I think Mike Evans is really the biggest takeaway. I think he's going to be a solid wide receiver 3. I think Baker, I'm not going to, maybe in a 2 QB league, you might be okay because you know that the Minnesota Vikings are going to bring it this week. So there could be some more points than we expect from the Bucs in this matchup. Let's jump down to number 3. It is the Carolina Panthers. Now, the Panthers are just loaded with talent and early draft picks in the secondary. They didn't make any changes. They still have the same guys. J.C. Horn is there as well. They brought in Von Bell, the Bengals safety. They have Jeremy Chin and Deontay Jackson. The biggest problem with them last year, they could not stay healthy. All those guys missed a handful of games last year, but they are all either first or second round picks. And so they have the talent, and now they bring in, and I'm going to butcher his name, sorry, the defensive coordinator from the Denver Broncos, Iro Ivuro. Sorry, buddy, I messed up your name, but he was the DC last year with a very, very good Broncos secondary. That was 4th fewest fantasy points allowed out wide, 8th fewest from the slot. Very good. So if he could get his hands on this young talent, there's a shot. And by the way, they also have Henderson, the former Jags first-round pick, as a backup on this team. So thoughts about this? You got the Carolina Panthers are facing, the only notable player is Drake London on the Atlanta Falcons. So what's your thoughts here? Are you starting? Maybe even throw Kyle Pitts in there. What's your thoughts about the Falcons versus Panthers secondary?
It's a tough one because I really love that central core. They've got really good safeties in Bell and Chin. We know is a good player. They've got Xavier Woods back there at free safety as well. So it's hard to know exactly where you'd have to target if you're Atlanta. I think you're probably having to run a lot more, and you know that Atlanta's going to want to run anyway. Having said that, we saw Drake London start to break out a bit towards the end of last year. You'd expect that to continue. There's no one else I'd want to touch there. Mac Hollins is kind of someone who's going to be a little bit interesting in certain matchups, but I just don't know that I'd risk it this week. He will be out wide, but we just don't know what this team's going to look like. So I think in week one, he's someone I'd avoid.
I think when you look at this matchup here too, the Panthers offense is a little banged up. They have they're not going to have maybe no Adam Thielen. They know DJ Chark. They are missing one of their interior offensive linemen. This game could be a little bit lower scoring. You could see Atlanta Falcons defense potentially being better play. So I think Drake London is probably a wide receiver 3. I would downgrade him from a 2 to a 3 this week, probably in my thoughts. But overall, I do think the Panthers defense will improve this year under a new defensive coordinator. And I think there's more optimism overall about the Panthers as well with the rookie quarterback, Bryce Young. All right, let's jump down number 4. It's the Los Angeles Rams. What are you doing, Rams? Like, honestly, at this point, the 4th most fantasy points allowed out wide last year. They have no Jalen Ramsey. He's got Bobby Wagner, who's a linebacker, but he's got Troy Hill, God. Taylor Rapp, safety, God. All they brought in was a Kella Witherspoon. This is another one of those matchups where I think that you could get an under-the-radar matchup here. The Rams are facing off against the Seattle Seahawks. So DK Metcalf and company could get up to a hot start. What's your thoughts here about the Rams matchup for the Seattle Seahawks?
Look, I've been talking all offseason about the Rams just looking absolutely awful. Their whole linebacking core is all just undrafted free agents from the last year or two. Their secondary is really weak as well. I know they brought John Johnson in for a little bit of veteran presence, but outside that, they've really got very, very little of anything. And I feel like it's going to be pretty easy for the Seahawks to put up points, especially with Geno Smith. We know it looks like Kenneth Walker's going to be healthy, so they will run the ball a little bit with those guys. Yes. But realistically, I think you're going to see a lot of Metcalf. You're going to see a lot of Tyler Lockett. You're definitely starting Metcalf. You're probably starting Locker. And realistically, even Jackson Smith and Ajigba, he's a bit of a riskier start. But if you're in a deeper league where you've got a couple of flex spots, it is reasonable to play him as one of your flex options, even though I suspect you'll probably be in the slot. This is still a good matchup for that as well. Realistically, any Seahawks suddenly come into play, except for Noah Fant, because don't do it to yourself.
Yeah, last season, Geno had a very big game, one of the 2 games, but in week 13 against the Rams, he went 28 for 39, 367 and 3 folks. So honestly, now though, Jalen Ramsey, might be another matchup. Get DK in your lineup, Tyler Lockett as well. I do like that. And I think Geno is probably an interesting streamer / DFS play this week. Might be underplayed. All right, let's talk about the last one. Our last one in the top 5 for out wide matchups. It's the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the Cowboys are one of those teams where they brought in Stephon Gilmore, and Stephon Gilmore has been one of the better outside cornerbacks for the last, decade or so. The guy was a defensive player of the year. So he is a little bit older now, but he is an obvious upgrade for this team now playing outside with Trayvon Diggs, who Diggs is more of like an opportunistic player, gets interceptions, allows a lot of yards. So I guess for fantasy football, we don't care. That's actually great. But now you're adding Stephon Gilmore to replace Anthony Brown. They still have a really good DC and Dan Quinn, but it does seem like this team might not be as good of a matchup this season. This week they got
your Giants.
Yeah, my New York Giants. So, what's your quick thoughts here? I honestly, Darius Slayton, Hodgins, Paris Campbell. Quick thoughts about this matchup for the Giants.
Honestly, as much as we talked about how much we like the Giants wide receivers during the offseason, I think until we see how exactly they're going to use them, you don't really want to be starting any in week 1. They're more bye week guys, and we'll see if any really stands out as the obvious wide receiver 1. Darren Waller, assuming he's healthy, and it seems like he probably will be, becomes a viable play. And he was a viable play anyway. If you got Darren Waller, you're starting Darren Waller. There's no reason you wouldn't. Other than that, I realistically think you probably got to sit all the wide receivers, even though this isn't the worst matchup for them. We just don't know who's going to be the guy to own there yet.
It's the Kansas City Chief conundrum. Learn from your Thursday night mistakes, Bob. Like, it's a conundrum, all right? Maybe you get some clarity in week 1, play guys that you know are going to be out there and all that stuff. But I got to admit, like, after looking at this and kind of understanding the Stephon Gilmore situation, and I honestly think it is a better wait-and-see approach. Play Waller, play Daniel Jones, play Saquon Barkley. All right, let's jump down to the slot matchups, folks. Now, it's important to go check out our slot versus wide receiver data because you'll be surprised. A lot of guys are they might play 2/3 of their snaps out wide, but that 1/3 they're in the slot, they might get a lot of production from there. So it's good to go check that out as well. Let's talk about the top 5 matchups from last year. It was the Lions at 1, Bucks, Raiders, 49ers, and Eagles. We just saw the Lions on Thursday night. Obviously, things did not go well for Sky Moore, but ironically, Sky Moore played half his snaps out wide. So I was surprised when I saw that. He was playing outside a lot. Rashid Rice was the one that really played the most in the slot, predominantly more of his snaps in there. And he actually almost had the same amount of slot snaps. That's a lot of slot snaps, S's. Almost the same amount of slot snaps as Sky Moore. Holy cow, the S's, folks. Huh? Friday? They got us Friday. Monday, I'd be very grumpy saying all these S's. Anyway, so long story short, it obviously in that case, it didn't necessarily, impact. It wasn't as impactful, but here's what we're trying to tell you. So if you just look at the slot changes for the Detroit Lions, they brought in the rookie. They drafted the kid that played the slot last night. Brian Branch. Sorry, obviously my notes are all back.
I've got him in IDP. I was very happy with that pick 6. I was cheering him all the way down. That was nice.
So they also brought in CJ Gardner-Johnson as well. And then they brought in, and I'm sorry, Sutton, not Cortland Sutton, Cameron Sutton, the outside cornerback from the Steelers. Jeez, I had my notes listed in the order of when I wrote it up, so now I have to search for the lines. There we go. All right, so Cameron Sutton, Brian Brandt, CJ Gardner-Johnson, and they did lose their other safety, but those changes, they talked about it pre-show. They invested in their secondary, and it kind of showed last night. So that's why we're doing this show today. Your quick thoughts about how they played last night, and do you think it was more of a product of the lack of weapons from the Chiefs, or do you think that the secondary is improved in 2023?
I think it's massively improved. I'm a big fan of Brian Branch. CJ Gardner-Johnson, a little bit underrated. They've also got Emmanuel Mosley, but didn't play last night because he's injured, so they had Jerry Jacobs, who isn't actually too bad either. Realistically, the Lions secondary is massively improved compared to last year. I think they're going to end up in slightly fewer shootouts. Having said that, we've only seen them once, and the same thing's happening with the opposition teams. It might be that once opposition teams get a little bit of a better look at them, they're going to start to be able to see where those holes are and take advantage of them a little bit better.
Okay, let's jump down to the Tampa Bay Bucks at number 2. Of course, we just talked about Minnesota earlier. Same matchup. They got the Vikings. Now, we all know that Justin Jefferson is the dominant guy on this offense, but when you look at Tampa Bay, they've been handcuffed by their salary cap. So they lost Sean Murphy-Bunting, Keanu Neal, Logan Ryan. They did not add much in the secondary. So you're taking a little bit from them, but they still have – the thing that's key with the Bucs is they have stud outside cornerbacks. They have Charlton Davis and Jamel Dean. That's why you'll see that their out wide metrics are actually very good, but their slot metrics where they get beat. So I know Justin Jefferson's a beast. He's going to dominate. That's what he does. But is KJ Osborne, for example, a streamer this week because he gets a lot of his reps in the slot? What's your thoughts about the Viking matchup against the Buccaneers?
It's a really interesting one. I expected earlier in the preseason we'd see D. Delaney take over their slot cornerback role, but he wasn't very good last year. He allowed Chase Claypool to have a 96-yard one touchdown game in the only game he broke out for last year, Chase Claypool. So realistically, I don't think he's particularly good, and they've seen the same thing. They've brought in an undrafted free agent from this year in Christian Izien. He's not going to be very good either. He's a 2023 undrafted free agent. So I think that's going to be another really good matchup for this year. I think that KJ Osborne's probably going to get the slot snaps in Minnesota, but Jordan Addison can play there as well, and Justin Jefferson might get floated in there occasionally just to get him a better matchup. So it's hard to know exactly how they use that. For that reason, I'm not that high on KJ Osborne. He's more of a desperation play if you really need someone, maybe a DFS play, but I can't see myself starting him in redraft.
And that's what I put in my notes. My article drops later today, or dropped already. I don't even know at this point. It's dropping today at some point. I talk about that. I literally wrote that he is on maybe the wide receiver 4 map and a DFS sleeper in week 1 for KJ Osborne there as well. All right, let's jump down to number 3. It's the Raiders. Now, I did write this up a little bit earlier, but the main changes for the Raiders is that they brought in Marcus Peters, the outside cornerback, formerly of the Ravens. And so the other thing I noticed when I was doing my research is that Nate Hobbs, who's their really good standout from 2 years ago, the rookie from 2 years ago in the slot, is moving back to the slot this year. Last year, they tried to play him out wide, so that could change things up. They have Nate Hobbs playing more in the slot. He only played 78 of 422 coverage snaps on the inside last year. So that could be something that changes this year, especially Marcus Peters, a nice player, but he's another one of those guys that is a gambler, and he can get beat a decent amount. And then they also have a fourth-round rookie starting on the other side. So this could change a little bit for the Raiders. What's your thoughts here about the matchup this week? They got Denver, who might be down Jerry Jeudy, so you got Marvin Mims and Cortland Sutton.
Yeah, I don't really understand what the Raiders are doing. Bringing Peters in was a good move. Moving Hobbs to the slot makes a lot of sense. They really struggled there last season. I think you'll find that out wide is where they start to look stronger again this year. Really don't love Bennett, their rookie. I thought they might use someone like Brandon Faison, but he's now on IR. So realistically, they might see some changes as the season goes on in that other wide cornerback slot. This is a matchup which is still one you can definitely target. Having said that, they're playing Denver. Jerry Jeudy, we don't know about his health anyway as their slot receiver. So it might be that they end up targeting guys like Cortland Sutton a lot more. I think Sutton's probably may even be the guy to target, especially if you're looking for big plays or something like that, maybe in DFS. Other than that, I'm probably not touching this too much.
Yeah, I got Cortland Sutton as like a wide receiver 3. He actually played decently well in the 2 games last year against the Raiders. So with Jeudy, probably, even if he does play extremely limited, I actually think that you could get away with Sutton as your wide receiver 3 in this matchup. All right, let's jump down to number 4. It is the 49ers. So obviously they lost D'Amico Ryans, the defensive coordinator, and they're moving to Steve Wilkes, former DC from the Carolina Panthers. Kind of a defense that kind of underperformed last year. But the 49ers are absolutely loaded, so we're not stressing too much about it. They did lose Jimmy Ward and Emmanuel Mosley this offseason. Jimmy Ward is a pretty good safety. Emmanuel Mosley's a fine outside cornerback type player. They did add Isaiah Oliver from the Atlanta Falcons, so there is a little bit of shakeup, and I believe Ward is going to be out this week, so they could be down another player in the secondary. But so your thoughts here about their matchup this week? They get Pittsburgh in week 1.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of this. I think we all expected that Isaiah Oliver would become the new slot cornerback, but there's a lot of during the offseason, it started to look a lot more like they're going to use Diomedor Lenoir there. He's good, but we haven't really seen him play in the slot very much. So if they do that, they're going to become very weak out wide. If they don't do that, then Oliver in the slot's fine, but I'm not. He's definitely someone that we could target. We've seen that teams kind of need to target the secondary of the 49ers because their front 7 is so good. And I think realistically, we could expect the same thing to happen here. Having said that, they're playing against Pittsburgh. We know where Pittsburgh's strength is. It's in your George Pickett, it's in your Deontay Johnson. Probably we're going to see Allen Robinson in the slot. He's not the guy I want to be targeting anyway. So I wouldn't be starting Allen Robinson regardless. Johnson becomes an okay option. Pickens becomes an okay option. For me, they're both kind of in that wide receiver 3 area. They're fine to start in your flex. They're fine if you need to start someone as wide receiver, but they're definitely not someone I'd be targeting.
Yeah, Travarius Ward, I'd be curious to see if he's questionable. If he's out, you're going to probably get a much better matchup for Deontay Johnson. So join us live on Sunday. We do the Sunday Live Start Sit Show. We'll be breaking down the injuries. If Ward ends up being out, I think Deontay Johnson and George Pickens gets a bump. But based on it could have been schematically as well. You got to remember, a lot of teams are playing more zone now than ever. So moving to Wilkes, we actually don't know what he's going to do. He's not going to replicate the same defense that D'Amico Ryans. They're not the same guys, and they come from the same tree. So that will be an interesting dynamic there as well. Let's talk about the last one, which is kind of a surprise too, is the Eagles. I think a lot of people think the Eagles and the 49ers, for example, are very dominant defenses, but they did have their vulnerabilities, and this is the slot thing again. The Eagles in week 1 will be facing off against the New England Patriots. Obviously, that could be a Juju Smith-Schuster matchup right there. So that is interesting from especially a wide receiver 3, maybe even a DFS play there. Let's jump down to see. Okay. This is all right. So last year, they lost Marcus Epps, one of their safeties, at CJ Gardner-Johnson. They brought in Terrell Edmonds, which is a slight upgrade in coverage, who's a Pittsburgh safety, but their cornerbacks are basically the same. Their safeties are the ones getting changed, which is also impacting the middle of the field. So there could be something here for Juju especially, but what's your thoughts about the Eagles slot matchup for the Patriots?
Yeah, I mean, they have Avonte Maddox coming back. He missed half of last season, so it'll be interesting to see how he goes now that he's healthy again. I think it kind of makes sense. Teams like the 49ers and Eagles, teams that are getting targeted, teams have to throw on them. And a lot of the time it's in garbage time where you're going to throw to the middle of the field because that's where the holes are going to be. Teams are generally going to defend the sidelines knowing going to want to do clock management. So it makes sense that if a team has a lot of points against you, you're probably going to end up with your slot receivers getting a few more garbage time touches as well. I do think the Eagles are someone that most weeks you can target. Juju Smith-Schuster is a guy I'm very unsure about this season. I don't know that he's someone I'd wanting to use this week, even though it is a pretty good matchup. I don't really want to use any of the Patriots receivers, but we know that Devontae Parker might be injured. If he's out, then Juju becomes a guy who might just get so many targets that you have to use him. If you're desperate for a receiver, he might become a viable option. He's around that, wide receiver 40 region for me at the moment.
Yeah, I would say a lot of these guys are probably wide receiver 4s that we're talking about these enhanced matchups. I do think that for me, like the Kansas City Chiefs thing, like last night just made me realize, like, we don't know yet if Juju's going to be the guy. I know it's easy to say that Juju is going to just be the Jacoby Myers role and he's going to be like a wide receiver 3 this year and yada, yada, yada. But the problem with that is it's Bill O'Brien's offense now. And Bill O'Brien's not the same. It's not apples to apples. I know he did coach, was the OC way back in the day. They had Wes Welker have a monster year. But if you look at his time in Houston, it wasn't like he featured a slot guy. I mean, he was DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, those guys, Will Fuller, like deep threats, vertical, outside guys. So I think it's best to fade it. If you were hit crazy by injuries, let's say you have Judy, let's say you have Cooper Kupp, let's say you have multiple of those guys early, and you have Juju as your wide receiver 5, can you sub him as a wide receiver 3? I think so. I think it's better than trying to find somebody off the waivers or trying to take a guy that, I guess a good question for you, Marvin Mims replacing Judy if he's out, or would you rather start Juju Smith-Schuster?
I think it's a really tough one. The other thing with Juju as well, if Devontae Parker's out, Juju might move out wide and they might bring in Jamario Douglas to play in the slot. So I just don't know that we know how Juju is going to get used. That does make me really nervous about him. I kind of like Marvin Mims. I like the upside, especially if Judy's out. I'd probably play Mims because I feel like he has a little bit more upside than Juju does in what could end up being a really run-heavy offense this week.
All right, Ben. That's all we got for our slot first wide analysis, but let's give you some shine here, folks. Weekly Streamers and Stashes is now up on Razzball.com. Ben breaks it down for you every single week. Ben, just give us some insights from the article. What's your thoughts about your streamers this week?
Yeah, look, it's a good week for running back streamers. You got guys like J.K. Dobbins, Jamal Williams, who are going to get good workloads. Brian Robinson becomes really interesting against that Cardinals defense. A couple of good stashes as well. Jalen Warren, someone I've been talking about a heap throughout the preseason. He's someone who I think is going to get a lot more touches than we expect against Najee Harris. And then, of course, with receivers, we talked about guys like Michael Thomas, but Jahad Dodson becomes interesting. Even though we know Terry McLaurin's probably going to play, he might be a little bit limited. We know that turf toe is the kind of thing that doesn't really go away. So Jahad Dodson, someone that I like as a streamer this week as well.
All right, that's fantastic. And make sure you go check out Ben's article every single week on Razzball.com and go jump over. Follow him on Twitter at Fantasy First Down. There is no O on Twitter, folks. Sorry, we had to drop the O. That's the letter he decided had to go. But we do appreciate all Ben's content and being on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. Make sure you join us in 2 days for 3 hours answering your start-sit questions live, folks. We're going to be there. We're going to do weather updates. Like last year, wouldn't it have been nice to know if there was a windstorm in Chicago and you wouldn't have started Trey Lance and or Justin Fields? Speaking for a friend, if you were paying attention, come on, Bob. I would have sat Trey Lance in 1 week if I did that. But you're going to be getting all that information now. We're never going to make that mistake again on the Sunday Live Start Sit Show for 3 straight hours. And, of course, give us a follow on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel, IG, and TikTok. And, of course, jump over to Razzball.com for all the articles you need to help you win your fantasy league. Once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. I want to thank my co-host again, Ben Wasley. We are out of here, folks.